Behind me are the final resting place of 4,468 German soldiers who never made it home from the Second World War. This is the German War Cemetery in Crete here at Maleme. Most of the individuals who are buried here fell during the invasion of the island in May 1941. The remaining individuals fell during the years of occupation and resistance on the island thereafterwards. This video is not about glorifying the regime that these men who lie at rest fought and died for. It's about expanding our historical understanding of the time period so we can better understand. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the individual stories of the individuals who lie at rest here and see what we can learn from them, ranging from many different stories, starting with a family who lost 3 of their sons on the same day. How does one measure the immense impact that loss has on a family? Imagine that you're a mother and you receive word that 3 of your sons fell on the exact same day, the 21st of May, 1941, on the island of Crete. I want to share with you the story of Graf von Blücher Brothers. 2 of them share a headstone. They were identified and lie together, while one of the brothers was never identified and his name is engraved on the wall of the missing. Let's hear their stories and let's see what we can learn from it.
The story of the von Blücher brothers is one of the most tragic family stories connected to the German war cemetery at Maleme. When this burial ground was concentrated on the 6th of October 1974, the brother's sister Gertraud Freifrau from Kettelhort came here for the first time. During the fighting on Crete, she had lost 3 of her 4 brothers in a single day. The oldest brother was named Wolfgang Heiner Peter Liebrecht Graf von Blücher. He had trained in agriculture and forestry, and after the early death of their father, he took over the family estate in Mecklenburg. In January of 1940, at the age of 23, Wolfgang volunteered for the Fallschirmjäger. Before Crete, he had already served in operations in Norway and the Netherlands. In May of 1940, during the fighting for the bridges of Dordrecht in Holland, Wolfgang, then a reserve lieutenant and a platoon leader in the Fallschirmjäger Regiment 1, earned the Ritterskreuz, the Knight's Cross, for storming a strongly defended enemy bunker position with outstanding personal bravery. By the time he came to Crete, Wolfgang was already a decorated soldier, and the example his younger brothers followed. Liebrecht Wilhelm Constantin Wolf Uriel Graf von Blücher-Finken was born in 1922. In 1940, he completed his Abitur and had originally wanted to become an engineer. He loves things such as music and literature, and he was interested in water sports. He originally wanted to join the Navy because of the weakness in his eyes, but he was not accepted. Instead, he first went to an infantry regiment in Köln as an officer candidate. But Wolfgang convinced him to follow him into the Fallschirmjäger. And from January 1941, Liebrecht received his basic training. His first operation would be the jump over Crete on the 21st of May, 1941. The youngest of the brothers was named Hans Joachim Gebhard Liebrecht Graf von Blücher-Finken. He was still at boarding school, and Wolfgang was his great role model. With his mother's permission, Hans Joachim joined the Fallschirmjäger Regiment 1 at just 17 years old. He received a short special training at Sentinel, and not long after that, he too was sent into the airborne operation against Crete. On the 19th of May, 1941, 2 days before the operation began, Wolfgang wrote one last letter to his family from Athens. Their mother kept that letter, even during the later fighting from their homeland. But by the time it reached them, Wolfgang, Liebrecht, and Hans Joachim were already gone. During the fighting, for 4 long weeks, the family had no certainty. Then the news arrived. All 3 had fallen on the same day, the 21st of May, 1941. That morning, Wolfgang was to jump near Heraklion. According to the family account, he came under heavy fire soon after landing. Hans Joachim landed shortly afterward in the same area. The records say he was trying to help free Wolfgang's platoon, which had been surrounded. He was fatally wounded during that attempt. Liebrecht belonged to another battalion of the same regiment. He also came down near Irakkilon in the middle of British tanks and fell there with his comrades. Wolfgang and Hans Joachim were later given graves here at Maleme, but Liebrecht was never found. Despite an intensive search by the Volksbund, his remains could not be recovered. His name is remembered on the memorial plaque for the missing among the 360 German soldiers on Crete whose bodies were never found. For the von Blücher family, Crete meant losing 3 sons in one day. 2 brothers have graves here. One only has a name on a plaque. And behind those names is a sister who came here decades later, standing for the first time at a place where her brothers were remembered.
Talking about the story of the 3 brothers who all lost their lives on the same day, we mentioned Liebrecht. He was the one who could not be identified. His name is listed right here behind me on the walls of the missing. And if we take a look right here, we see his name, Liebrecht Graf von Blücher. He was an Oberjäger, and he fell on the 21st of May, 1941. Before we get into the individual human stories, I want to share a little context with you exactly where we are. This is the island of Crete. Many people come here today for their holidays, but in 1941, this became a battlefield, and this German military cemetery behind me is a result of that battle and the years of occupation that followed it. The cost of the Battle of Crete was enormous for the attackers, the defenders, and the civilians. Here at Maleme, one of the main objectives was to take the airstrip. Once the German Fallschirmjäger took that airstrip, more German troops could be flown in to supply the attack. That's why it's almost fitting that the German War Cemetery rests here in Maleme, one of the major objectives of the battle in 1941. The cemetery here was officially concentrated in 1974, and it's an interesting cemetery to come to. Because you are on this beautiful island behind me, you see the Mediterranean Sea, and on this hillside, you're reminded about the brutal cost, what the Battle of Crete was, and the damage that it had on this island, and the impact that it had on the defenders, the attackers, and most importantly, the civilians. I've been to many German war cemeteries, and each one is uniquely different. You can never say that one German war cemetery looks like the other. And that is another key example here at this German war cemetery here in Maleme in Crete. After telling the story of the 3 brothers, I want to share the story of another paratrooper who also lost his life in the fighting near Irakkilon. His story is connected to something very personal. He wrote a postcard weeks before the invasion. Let's go to his headstone and let's see what we can learn from his story.
The next grave belongs to that of Karl Lüftl. Karl was born on the 21st of January, 1921 in Unterhaching, near Munich. He was the second son of Heinrich Lüftl, a master tailor, and his wife, Maria. He also grew up with 5 siblings, Heinrich, Joseph, Otto, Wilhelm, and Marceli. Before the war, Karl's life was still very ordinary. His identity card listed his profession as a painter's assistant. He was also a talented gymnast. In 1938, he took part of the German championships in Breslau. And at home, there was something waiting for him. Karl had a girlfriend named Lisa. Karl later joined with the Fallschirmjäger. He completed his parachute training in Stralsund. From September to November of 1940, he was at the parachute school in Braunschweig. His jump card still survives today. It shows his training with the 3rd Fallschirmjägerschule in Braunschweig. By the time he came to Crete, Karl was serving as a Gefreiter in the 2nd Battalion of the Fallschirmjäger Regiment 1. One of the more personal items that survived from Karl is a postcard he sent to his parents on the 26th of April, 1941. That's just 3 weeks before the invasion of Crete. On the back of that postcard, Karl wrote home to thank his parents for a watch they had sent him. He then mentions that from his father's card, he learned that someone they knew had fallen. And then Karl wrote a sentence that feels painfully close to to what would happen to him. He wrote, quote, "Well, it can happen to anyone. That is what war is." End quote. At the side of the card, he added one more ordinary request. He asked his parents to have 2 enclosed films developed. That is what makes this postcard so human. In one line, he accepts the dangers of war, and in the next, he's still thinking about having photographs developed back home. And then came that fateful day. On the 20th of May, 1941, Karl was sent into the airborne assault on Crete. His unit was part of the attack on the airfield and the city of Heraklion. The records give the time very precisely. Karl fell at 5:30 in the evening. According to the death notification, he was hit during the jump by British machine gun fire. He was struck in the chest before he even reached the ground. Karl was only 20 years old. Karl was originally buried southeast of Heraklion. Later, his remains were brought here to the German War Cemetery at Maleme. Today, Karl Lüftl rests in Block 1, grave 677, a young man from Unterhaching, a painter's assistant, a son and a brother, and someone Lisa back home was waiting for. The tragedy of these stories is that it does not end with their death. The war continued to reach into his family. His older brother Heinrich was wounded in 1942 by a shot in the lung. He survived the war, but later died in 1978 from the long-term effects. His younger brother Joseph, who was born in 1925, served with the mountain troops in France and Italy. Near the end of the war, on the 26th of April 1945, Joseph was shot near Verona, probably from partisans. He was listed missing until 1952. Today, he rests at the German War Cemetery at Castelmano. Another brother, Otto, who was drafted in 1944 at only 17 years old. He served with the Luftwaffe in Czechoslovakia and became prisoner of war in 1945. He later escaped, hidden in a feed truck from the zoo where he had been working voluntarily. The youngest brother, Willie, born in 1929, was still pulled in for service in February of 1945, but the war had ended before he was sent into action. Karl Lüftl's grave is one name among thousands here at Maleme, but behind that name is a whole family history, a postcard, a surviving jump card, an identity document, a photograph, and a sentence written home just weeks before that fateful day. It can happen to anyone, and for Karl Lüftl, it happened to him.
What I think is so tragic from Karl's story, looking at that postcard, is he wrote in it what can happen to an individual during war. And a month later, the exact same thing happened to him. It's these personal connections that bring a story to a name that we may look at these individuals and try to understand their lives. Behind every story of the 4,000 plus human lives that lie at rest here in this cemetery is a story of individual family heartbreak that had to endure the loss of their loved ones. Imagine you're a mother and you haven't heard from your son and you wrote a letter asking if anyone has seen him, only to learn that you wrote that letter after he had already fallen. That's the story of this next individual. Let's go to his headstone and let's see what we can learn from it.
The next human story belongs to Lorenz Scheck. His family and friends called him Lenz. He was born on the 7th of June 1915 in Obergiesdorf in Upper Bavaria. Later, he lived in Laufentierbach. Before the war, he worked as a salesman in the Friedman shop. Lorenz came from a very Catholic family. His faith was a major part of who he was. But his surviving writings also show something more complicated. They show a young man shaped by his religion, his homeland, and by the political world around him. Lorenz had a fiancée. He was engaged to Anna Rodler, and that detail matters because when his story reaches Crete, it's not only that of a soldier, it's also about a future waiting for him at home through his fiancée. His sister Maria married Ludwig Unterreiner on New Year's Eve 1940. Ludwig was one of Lorenz's comrades. And it is partly from Ludwig's diary that we know what happened to Lorenz after he fell. That diary turns the story from a military record into something more personal. It shows the news traveling from one comrade to another, then back home to Anna, Maria, and his mother. The records show that during the war, Lorenz served with the mountain troops. He served as an Oberjäger in the 9th Company of the Getriebsjäger Regiment 100. He had already taken part in the invasion of Czechoslovakia. Then he fought in Poland, and then later France, finally in Greece. The surviving documents also record his awards. He received the Iron Cross 2nd Class in October of 1939. He received the Sudetenland Medal in December of 1939. And after being wounded in France on the 5th of June 1940, he received the Wound Badge in black. But the most revealing part of his story is not the list of campaigns or awards. It is what he left behind in writing. Lorenz wrote many poems. 29 pages of them survive between 1939 and May of 1941. Those poems speak about home, nature, mountains, camaraderie, faith, soldier life, and death. Some of them are deeply religious. Some are full of longing for Bavaria and the people he left behind. But others also show the language of sacrifice, duty, and the ideology of his time. That is important to say clearly. Lorenz was not outside the world he served in. His Catholic faith and political worldview around him existed side by side. That is part of the historical truth of his story. In the spring of 1941, Lorenz was moving south with his unit. According to his brother-in-law, Ludwig Unterreiner, the two men met on the 31st of March 1941 near the Bulgarian-Greek border. They met again on the 24th of April in Greece. That would be the last time Ludwig saw him. Only weeks later, Lorenz was on Crete. By then, the main battle around Maleme had already taken place. Lorenz's final fighting was further east near Galatas, west of China. Then came the news of his death in a letter dated the 6th of June 1941. It was written by a comrade named Schoss to Ludwig Unterreiner. The letter began with a hard sentence: Lenz has fallen. Schoss wrote that Lorenz fell on the 25th of May, early in the morning at 5:30. The cause was a gunshot wound. However, by the time Schoss reached him, Lorenz had already been buried. He wrote that there had been prayer and farewell at the grave. And then he wrote something that shows where the real weight of this news would fall. For those still at home, he said the sacrifice was greater. And that line stays with you, because by then, Anna, Maria, and his mother were still waiting for the news of what happened to him. In Ludwig's diary, he recorded what happened the days after the news arrived. On the 7th of June, he wrote a prayer for him. He asked God to give peace to Lorenz and to give strength to Anna and the loved ones at home. Then, on the 8th of June, he wrote that he had sent letters to Anna and Maria. He knew they already understood the pain, and he wrote that this would be the hardest sacrifice for both of them and for Lorenz's mother. Then, on the 11th of June, Ludwig received a letter from Lorenz's mother. She had written it on the 25th of May, the same day Lorenz fell. In that letter, she asked, "Have you seen Lenz again?" She did not yet know. By the time her words reached Ludwig, her son was already gone. Lorenz's first burial was at the cemetery in Gurney on Crete, grave number 310. Later, his remains were moved here to the German War Cemetery at Maleme. Today, Lorenz Scheck rests in Block 2, grave 133. Lorenz's story is not that simple. His writings show faith and poetry. They show love for home and nature. But they also show you how deeply the language of duty, sacrifice, and ideology entered the lives of young men like himself. This is why this grave matters. Not to glorify him, but to understand him. To see the human being, the beliefs he carried, the world that shaped him, and the people he left behind. Anna, Maria, Ludwig, and his mother, who wrote on the very day he fell, "Have you seen Lentz again?"
What makes Lorenz's story unique is that so many personal materials survived him, and we can really study them and take a look to try to understand his mindset. It's important to look at the human aspects and the human element of this horrific conflict to try to understand the minds of the individuals who went through it. The next story that I want to share is not about an individual who lost his life during the invasion of the island. It's an individual who died 3 years later during the occupation. Let's go to this man's headstone and let's see what we can learn from his story.
The final grave I want to stop at belongs to Rudolf Reissig. He was born on the 2nd of July, 1906, in Timmendorf, near Otteran in Saxony. Before the war, Rudolf was not a career soldier. He trained as a painter between 1921 and 1924. He also worked as an art painter at the Dresden Art Academy. Art was part of his life. And even during the war, drawings and watercolors would remain part of his story. To help us understand Rudolf's story, it's important to take a look at his family life. In 1927, he married his great love, Hedwig Köhler. They lived together in Frankenburg in Saxony and had 4 children together: Rudolf, Ruth, Joachim, and Gisela. Gisela being the youngest, born in 1939. So before this grave was a military record, it was a family life. It was a husband, a father, a working man, and an artist. According to the records provided, the exact date Rudolf was called into military service is not known. His first wartime station seems to have been Poland. By December of 1942, a field postcard from Greece already shows one of his drawings. It was probably a picture of his temporary commendation there. Later, Rudolf was stationed on Crete. By 1944, he was serving as a Feldwebel on the island. From Crete, he wrote regularly to his family. His letters are full of the strange contrast of war. On one side, he described the daily life of a soldier: food, supplies, post, and waiting. On the other side, he wrote with deep longing for home. He reportedly told his family he had enough food. He even wished he could send some of it home. But because the difficult postal connections between the island and the mainland, that was not possible. In one letter, Rudolf wrote that they were living so well that they could not even eat everything. That line feels almost unreal when you remember what his family and much of Germany were living through at the time. However, the letters also show what he missed. In a letter dated the 4th of October 1944, Rudolf wrote about snow. He wondered if there would be beautiful snow when he came back home. He wrote that he would like to experience a real winter again. And then he asked Hedwig if she would walk with him in the snow. And that is one of the human details that is within his files. A man in Crete, surrounded by beautiful weather, imagining the German winter. Not politics, not glory, just home, just the snow, and walking with his wife through it. In a later dated letter, Rudolf wrote that he and his unit were stationed far away from the front fighting. He said that they were still living in peace, and they only rarely did anything to remind them that they were in the middle of a war. That did not mean that the war was not there though. It meant Rudolf's war was different. It was a rear area war, waiting, guard duty, supplies, separation, and uncertainty. Another one of his letters, dated the 6th of November 1944, Rudolf actually wrote openly about this. He said his soldier's life was strange. He mentions that they arrived too late for Poland, and they had not taken part in other campaigns. And now he was sitting on Crete, perhaps remaining inactive until the end of the war. His words reflect how strongly military culture of the time judged men by frontline service. Rudolf seemed to measure his own wartime role against those fighting on the main fronts. He writes in a letter that shows some remorse that he's on the island while his family's having to endure this great struggle in Germany, saying that compared to what his family had to endure, he felt that was very little. And that is what makes this letter so revealing. He was far from home. He was in a relatively safe location, but he was missing his children growing up. He was cut off by the difficult postal system, and still, he saw the greater burden of the one carried by those waiting at home. Only 8 days after he wrote that letter, everything changed. On the 14th of November 1944, Rudolf was on a patrol in the mountains. There he was shot by partisans during an ambush, badly wounded by machine gun fire. But that date is important. It was the same day as his youngest daughter, Galicia, turned 5 years old. And on her birthday, he was badly wounded. According to the record, he was carried out of the mountains after a long, difficult transport and was brought to a military hospital. There, doctors tried to save him, but the wounds were too severe. Rudolf Reissig died the next day, on the 15th of November, 1944. He was only 38 years old. The official news reached his family shortly before Christmas. It came through a handwritten letter from the Oberleutnant Kessler, dated the 18th of November, 1944. Kessler wrote that Rudolf had been promoted to Feldwebel effective the 1st of November. He had taken part in the operation as a platoon leader. He was wounded at the same time as a non-commissioned officer and a machine gunner. His wound was to the abdomen. During the long operations, doctors gave him blood transfusions. Kessler wrote that when he visited Rudolf the next day, he was already very weak. He asked him if he had any special wish. Rudolf said no. A few hours later, Kessler received the news that Rudolf had stopped living at 11:30. But behind these words that Kessler was writing was a family, was a mother and 4 children, a family still writing letters that would never reach their loved one. That's because before the news reached Rudolf's family, they were still sending letters to Crete. Those letters were returned, marked with the words, "Fallen for Greater Germany." The phrase is cold, official, and final, and among those returned letters was one from his 15-year-old son. He wrote to his father about his work and still going to school. There was also a line in that letter from the youngest sister, Galicia, who was only 5 years old. Her mother had guided her hand as she wrote it. The message said, "Dear Daddy, come back soon, stay healthy. Yesterday I had my birthday and got a muff. Greetings from you." She had written that the day after her birthday. The same birthday on which her father had been shot in the mountains of Crete. She had no idea yet. Rudolf Reissig was buried originally on the 16th of November, 1944 at the Soldiers' Cemetery near Siena. Later, after the German War Cemetery at Maleme was established, his remains were moved here. Today, Rudolf Reissig rests at Maleme, Block 4, grave 983, on top of the hill. Like so many others' lives ruined through this horrific conflict, Rudolf's story did not only end with the grave. In the 1950s, his brothers came to Crete. With them, they brought one of Rudolf's watercoloring paintings. It showed the house where he lived in Galatas during the war. Using that painting, they found the house, and inside, they met a woman named Anna who still lived there. Anna had known Rudolf personally, and she remembered him. There was another discovery there too. At the marketplace, there was a cafe called Der Maler, the painter. The owners were relatives of Anna, and they confirmed what the family already suspected. Rudolf had often been seen there. That detail changes the way you see his grave, because here at Maleme, Rudolf is listed as a soldier, but in Galatas, he's remembered as a painter, someone who had an impact there. Rudolf Reissig's story is not about glorification about the war, it's about an individual life. It's about distance. It's about letters, a family waiting, a child's birthday, a father who never came home, and a painter whose life on Crete was remembered long after the fighting had ended. His grave here is one marker among thousands, but behind that marker is Hedwig, Rudolf, Ruth, Joachim, and Galicia. A letter returned, a watercolored painting, and a house in Galatas where someone still remembered the man with his paintbrush.
According to the sources that I read, Rudolf was wounded on an ambush the exact day of his daughter's 5th birthday. That really adds to the tragedy of his human story. His daughter grew up without her father. Rudolf didn't survive his wounds, and he was reburied here at the German War Cemetery at Maleme. It's another one of those stories where if you peel behind the horrific actions of the regime that he served under and the horrificness of this war and just look at the human elements of the story, it helps you better understand the human suffering that occurred on all sides of the war.
When we visit and walk through a cemetery like this, it's easy to only see the rows of names. But behind every name was a human life, a son, a brother, a husband, a father, someone who wrote letters home, someone who had people waiting for them. These stories do not excuse the war Germany unleashed across Europe, and they do not erase the crimes of the regime. But they remind us that behind the decision of governments, dictatorships, and ideologies, there were millions of ordinary people whose lives were destroyed. War does not only destroy armies, it destroys families. It leaves mothers without sons, wives without husbands, and children who grow up never knowing their fathers. This is not a story about glory, it's about loss, about the human cost of hatred, dictatorship, and war, and about why remembrance matters. Not to honor war, but to understand what it takes from people, so we are better prepared to reject it. Places like this, cared for by the German War Graves Commission, the Volksbund, are not places of celebration, they are places of remembrance and places of warning, so that future generations can stand here, read these names, and remember what happens when humanity fails each other. Thank you for taking your time to watch this video.